Today we're discussing Parsha Ki-Tavo. This Parsha introduces us to the mitzvah of Bikurim, the requirement to bring one's first fruits to the holy temple. This mitzvah applies to fruits and produce grown in the land of Israel, and only those for which the land of Israel is praised as famous. And they are wheat, barley, dates, figs, grapes, pomegranates, and olives. And when in the temple, when the farmer arrives with his bikurim, with his first fruits of this yearly crop, the owner of the fruits recites a brief thanksgiving prayer to God and presents the produce, his bikurim, to the priests. We will come back to that in a few minutes. During the temple times, Jewish farmers were required to separate from their produce several different theses, portions. These were distributed to the priests, to the Levites, to the poor, and one tithe for which was eaten by its owners and everybody they invited in Jerusalem. We discussed that in the previous parshas. So in other words, Hashem, through the Torah, introduces the system of wealth distribution. And it's absolutely necessary to keep the population sustained. Not everybody is lucky, not everybody is doing, very well financially. So Hashem takes care of the refugees, of the widows, of the orphans, and this is one of the ways how he introduces that system. On the day before Passover, during those years which followed the conclusion of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, the farmer was to declare that he has performed all of the tithing duties, and then he beseeches God to bless his people and the land. So to bless him, basically his family, his close people associated with him, and everything what happens to him. Moses admonishes the Jews to observe God's commandments, reminding them that they have selected him, God, and he in turn has chosen them for his to be his holy people, his treasured nation, his servants. The Jews are instructed to gather large stones when they cross river Jordan, and these stones were to be plastered with lime, I guess, right? And the entire Torah was to be engraved upon them. And another set of similar stones was to be inscribed and with the entire Torah as well, and to be set on top of Mount Ebal. The Jewish people were instructed by Moshe to proclaim blessings and curses on Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. So the elders of the Levite tribe, as well as the Kohanim, together with the Holy Ark, stood between those two mountains in the valley, right? And 6 tribes ascended Mount Gerizim, and the other 6 tribes ascended Mount Ebal. And then the Levites and the priests in the valley faced each mountain alternatively and stated blessings and curses. They were stating the blessings towards Mount Gerizim and the curses towards Mount Ebal. And the blessings are bountiful and absolutely beautiful. But everybody I was talking to remembers basically the curses. Why? Because the curses are continuous, they will continue at length, and they sound very, very heavy, very gruesome actually. And they obviously take place if the Jews do not keep the Torah, do not keep the mitzvot, and do not follow the Torah laws. Moses reminds the Jews of all the miracles which took place during Jewish history, when Hashem took them out from Egypt, and until this very day, when he is basically doing his final sermon, which we discussed, the whole book of Devarim is 36 days of Moshe's sermon before he passes away. And he concludes by saying that it is therefore absolutely critical upon all of them, upon all Jewish people forever and ever, to follow God's covenant. Everything I'm going to say from now on are ideas of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. I picked up from his articles and just joined few dots, few points from different articles together in order to answer the questions which I'm going to point out to you. The thing is that what is amazing is why in this portion in Ki-Tavo we have got the whole new law of Bikurim, the first fruits law, and why is it together with the blessings and most of all curses which are there? It's a interesting question. Why all of this put together into one portion of the Torah? And let's try to understand this together. But before we do that, I want to share with you one couple of things. In the late 1960s, the era of student protests, if you remember, psychedelic drugs and the Beatles, the meditating with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and the story went around about an American Jewish woman in her 60s traveled to North India to see a celebrated guru. And there were huge crowds waiting there to see the holy man, tens of thousands of people. But she pushed through by saying basically that she needed to see the guru urgently. And eventually, after waving through all these bodies in there, she entered the tent and stood in presence of the master himself. And what she said that day became a legend. She said to the master, "Marvin, listen to your mother. Enough already. Come home." Starting in the 60s, Jews made their way into many different religions and cultures, with one exception, except their own. Judaism was historically an incredible religion with its own mystics and meditators and poets and philosophers, its holy men, its prophets, its women and prophetesses and visionaries and of all kinds. However, it often seemed to our young generation Jews particularly in the 60s and many years prior to that, we will come to that in a minute, that they need to look for spiritual enlightenment somewhere else, at great distance, and some climb the mountains and try to get to heaven or to go across the ocean. We always prefer the far to the near and the strange to what is part of our culture and our history. And for years I was thinking that this is a unique thing of our own age. But when I started to learn Torah, I realized that wasn't the case. And Moses, already foresaw this, and he is talking about this in this parsha. This is what he says in this week's parsha. Now, what I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not in heaven, so that you have to ask who will climb to heaven to get it and proclaim it to us, so we obeyed. Nor is it beyond the sea, so that you have to ask who will cross the sea to get it for us and let us hear, and so that we may obey it. No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth, in your heart, so you may obey it. It's part of your Torah. Moses had a vision that in the future Jews would say that to find inspiration, we have to ascend heaven or cross the seas, and it's anywhere but not here, not in our domain. And so it was. Actually, if you look back in our Jewish history, why the first temple was destroyed? Because Jewish people in the land of Israel were tempted by the gods of the Canaanites, the Baal, and it was by the Moabites, the Chemosh, and or Marduk, and Astarte from Babylon, the different gods of other people. And later on, during the time of Second Temple, we were attracted to Hellenism of the Greek version or the Roman version forms, and lots of Jews actually became, Greeks or Romans. They wanted to forget that they are Jews. It is a strange phenomenon, but best it expressed actually in a funny way. It's sort of smile through the tears. Groucho Marx said the following: I refuse to belong to the club that would accept me as a member. Jews have long had a tendency to fall in love with other people's ideas and beliefs and pursue them the spiritual paths of other people, so long as it is not their own. But this is very hard and very difficult, debilitating. More than that, normally it occurs in ages of affluence and not poverty, and eras, in eras of freedom and not slavery, when we have much to be grateful for to Hashem, but we only remember about Hashem when we seem to have little to thank God for. When we suffer, this is when we go back to Hashem. And that's unfortunately our sorry history. However, one reason the religion has survived in modern world, despite 4 centuries of secularization, which started with the Greek philosophers. And the reason why it has survived, because it answers 3 fundamental questions which every reflective human being with some intellectual capability here will ask himself at some point in time of his or her life. Who am I? Why am I here? And how then I shall live, subject to the answers to the first 2 questions. Neither of those 3 questions are answered, or can be answered actually, by the 4 great institutions of our modern Western civilization: science, technology, market economy, and the liberal democratic state. Science tells us how, but not why. Technology gives us power, but cannot tell us how to use the power. The market gives us choices, but does not tell us which choices to make. And the liberal democratic state, as a matter of principle, holds back from endorsing any particular way of life, so the choices are huge and there are no answers. So you basically left to your own resources. The result of this contemporary culture sets before us an almost infinite range of possibilities, but does not tell us who we are, why we are here, and how we should live. In Judaism, God is very close. He's here, listening to our debates when we study Torah. He is here in the joy of our festivals, in the tears of Tisha B'Av, in the sound of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and in the contrition and our desire for forgiveness on Yom Kippur. He is here in the area of Jerusalem, of Israel basically, and in the stones of Jerusalem. He is everywhere. Hashem is always with us. And to answer the questions who we are, what we are, let's look at Moses. Let's look at the first question to God in their first encounter at the burning bush, which Moses poses to God, says, who am I to lead those people out of slavery and to go to argue with the Pharaoh? Who am I? Yes, on the surface we think that he is basically trying to ask God why he should be the one who should go through all these calamities and lead the Jewish people out of Egypt. But underneath that question, not on Pshat level, but let's say on Rames or Drush level, he is asking Hashem, who am I? Because he was raised from being just a newborn baby, a few months old. He was raised by Egyptian princess. Then when he killed that Egyptian and ran to Midian and met his future wife Zipporah, right, at the well. Now, how did she presented him to her father? She ran to her father and said that this Egyptian prince, the Egyptian man basically managed to tell off the Midianite shepherds to get rid of them and protected her, right? So to her, he looked like an Egyptian because he was raised by Egyptian princess. Then he spends at least 60 years or something like this in Midian with Jethro, because we know that he was already 80 years old when this incident of burning bush was taking place. So by upbringing, he was an Egyptian. By his life experience, at least 60 years of his life, he was a Midianite shepherd for Jethro. But the incredible thing, when the decision time came, he acted on the basis of his ancestry, that he was a descendant of Abraham, the child of Amram and Yocheved. When he asked God his second question, who are you? God first told him, I will be what I will be. But then he gave him a second answer. God tells him, say to Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. This is what Hashem is telling Moshe. That we define him by what he, Hashem, promised to do. On the surface, God was telling Moshe to tell the Israelites, who sent you to us, But then there is this deeper answer. The answer to the question, who am I? Is simply not a matter of where I was born, where I spent my childhood or my adult years, or which one country I am a citizen of. Nor this is an answer, this question, who am I, is answered by what am I doing for living, or what are my interests or my passions. The things are about where I am and what I am, but not who I am. God's answer, I am the God of your fathers, suggests some fundamental proposition. First, it suggests identity runs through the genealogy. It is a matter of who my parents were, and who my parents' parents were, and so on and so on. And this is not always true, I know, right? Because sometimes children are adopted, and those children make conscience breaks sometimes with their parents, whoever they are. People convert from one religion to another. So this happens. But For most of us, identity lies in uncovering the story of our ancestors, which in the case of Jews, given an unparalleled dislocation in our life. Almost every story of Jewish people is about journeys, courage, suffering, escapes, fighting for survival, and sheer endurance. It was not simply that God was the God of their ancestors. He was also God who made certain promises, that He would bring them from slavery to freedom, from exile to promised land, that the Israelites were part of narrative which was taking place over a period of time. They were part of an unfinished story, and God was about to write the next chapter. Guess what? He is still writing it. We are still work in progress. And the next chapter is being written as we speak. All of this is, by the way, is just a small prelude to this remarkable law which is covered in this parsha, the law of Bikurim. It tells us that the first fruits were to be taken to the place God chooses, which is Jerusalem. They were to be handed to the priest, and each was to make a following declaration. And this was the declaration which the Jewish farmer bringing Bikurim to the priest was making at the time. Listen to the words carefully. And we repeat those words actually every year at the Seder, Passover Seder, when we're reading the Haggadah. My father was a wandering Aramean, and he went down into Egypt with a few people and lived there and became great, powerful, and populous nation. The Egyptians mistreated us and made us suffer, subjecting us to harsh labor. Then we cried out to the Lord, the God of our ancestors, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our suffering, our harsh labor, and our distress. The Lord then brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand and outstretched arm, with a great fearsomeness, and with the signs of wonders. He brought us to this place and gave us this land flowing with milk and honey. I am now bringing the first fruits of the soil that you, Lord, have given me. So it means that the farmer acknowledged that those fruits which he is giving back to Hashem, to the Kahanim basically, they do not belong to him. He is simply brought the harvest which Hashem gave him as a present. What makes this law remarkable is this. We would expect when celebrating the harvest of Bikurim, the soil and its produce, we will speak about the God of nature. But this text is not about nature. It's about history. It's about distant ancestors, and it's about wandering Arameans, and it is the story of our ancestors, and it is the narrative explaining why I am here and why the people to whom I belong is what it is and where it is. Do you realize what it means? It means that first time in history of humanity, we Jews identified ourselves as a consequence of historic events, and we made history part of our religion. We made it a fundamental aspect of our religious traditions and our religious behavior and the way we perceive Hashem and our relationship with Him. We were the first people on this planet who saw God in history, and the first to see the overarching meaning in history, and the first to make memory a religious duty. We Jews are a minority comparing to other nations. We always have been and we still are. 18 million Jews today is less than 0.2% of the population. It's less than the error percentage, for instance, on statistics on Chinese population. We are what we remember. And the first fruits was the declaration of way ensuring that Jews would never forget. In our age, the age of computerization and smartphones, memories have grown so fast that from kilobytes to megabytes, from megabytes to gigabytes, and the human memories have become foreshortened. We have got a very short memory span. And there is an important Jewish message here to humanity, to all, not only to Jews, to every nation. You cannot delegate your memory to machines. You have to renew it regularly and teach your next generation your history, your memories. Do not rely on telephones and computers to remember who you are and what you are and why you are here, because that leads to a disaster. As a matter of fact, Winston Churchill said the following: the longer you can look back, the further you can see forward. Or to put it slightly differently, those who tell the story of their past have already begun building their children's future. Winston Churchill. What Moshe meant, he was begging the young Jewish generation in his, last days of his life. He was saying, it's not up in heaven, nor is it beyond the sea. Was kinderlich, your parents trembled when they heard the voice of God at Mount Sinai. They were overwhelmed. And they said, if we hear any more, we will die. So God found ways in which he could meet, in which we could meet him without being overwhelmed. Yes, he is the creator, sovereign, the supreme power. He is in charge of the sun and the moon and all the whole universe. And however, on the other hand, he is also a parent, our partner, our lover, our friend. He is the Shekhinah. He is the Shukhin, the neighbor, meaning that the neighbor next door. He is. So we need to thank him every morning for the gift of life. Say the Shema twice daily for the gift of love. Join your voices to others in prayer so that the Spirit may flow through you, giving you the strength and the courage to change the world. When you can't see him, all it means that you're looking in the wrong direction. And when it seems that he is absent, he is there, behind the door. But you have to open the door. Don't treat him as a stranger. He loves you. He believes in you. He wants your success. To find him, you don't need to climb to heaven or cross the sea. He is the voice you hear in the silence of your soul. He is the light you see when you open your eyes to wonder. And he is the hand you touch in the pit of despair. He is the breath that gives you life. Ruach. He is our Hashem. Thank you very much. And I will see you in the next parsha. Goodbye.